We're continuing our conversation with women in the home build industry, and today we are joined by Hannah, who's a structural engineer, just to share her insights and her experience on the home building process from a structural engineer's perspective. This podcast is brought to you by Milk Projects Limited. The podcast is for educational purposes only. Seek professional advice to get specific help for your project. Enjoy this week's show. Welcome to an Architect and a DJ Build a Home podcast. I'm Mphangela. Kalinga's not with me today, but as always, you're in good company, and we have a guest today.
Hi.
Hi, Hannah, welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we start, I'd just like you to introduce yourself and what it is that you do.
Okay, it should be brief, right? Okay, my name is Hannah Nzovu. I'm a civil engineer. I work at Civil Strats Consulting Engineers, where I conduct civil and structural designs of different types of buildings.
So engineering, which include homes, yeah.
Yes.
And engineering is not, not a lot of women are in the engineering field. And I just want to hear from you what inspired you to get into the field of engineering.
Okay, so I think I would say my journey in engineering started in high school.
Yeah.
So I went to a technical school in grade 10. And I studied like GMD, woodwork, so I got interested in like engineering in general, like, oh, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And that's when I started saying things like, I would like to be a civil engineer.
Yeah.
But I think I really got into it a little bit more after I graduated, because then I did a little bit of research of what engineers do.
Yeah.
And so then after I got that understanding, and also, my father is an engineer, a civil engineer. So yes.
It's in the family.
Yes. I got to learn a lot from him as well.
Okay.
So then got inspired. But then also, I did my own research and tried to figure out, okay, so if I'm an engineer, what type of engineer should I become?
Yeah.
And then I had I had an interest in math and physics. And I figured civil combines both. So
yeah.
I said, why not?
Okay. So we're in good hands with this female power.
I hope so.
So in terms of the home building process, where is it that an engineer would get involved? What is it that you do exactly?
I would say an engineer should get involved right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because the initial stage is first you would have your design brief, which you would share normally with your architect. And then obviously you'd have to do some surveys on the site to figure out, okay, how is the land sloping, how is the drainage system going to be, where is the road reserve, where you're going to take the water, and then also look into the soil. You look into the type of soil, and probably conduct a geotechnical analysis where you discover what type of soil. Is it clay? Is it sandy? Is your land on a swampy area? So right from the start, I think an engineer should be involved, because they'll look into issues to do with drainage, issues to do with the type of soil. And then they'll have more input after the architect has already come up with an idea of what the client wants. Yeah. So I would say from the beginning.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
So how does someone get an engineer involved, and how do they know whether their project would actually need the input of an engineer?
Okay. I think most, or if not all, projects would probably need an engineer. But I think the input would depend on the type of building. Is it double story? Is it single story? And also your land and your soil. So I think what would be good is just to get an engineer to get an initial assessment of, you tell them what you want, the type of structure that you want, and then they can be able to give advice from that point onwards, and then probably give more input at a later stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it depends on the type of building.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from your experience, what are some of the common mistakes? I mean, we see lots of buildings that have already been constructed, and then you can tell where things have gone wrong. And from your experience and from what you observe in the home building sector specifically, what are the common mistakes that you see that are being done?
Okay, I think the biggest one, is people don't involve engineers.
That's the cry from all professionals.
Yes, like they want to take up the role of the engineer, architect, project manager. And I think people undermine the importance of having, obviously it depends on how big the project is, then maybe some of these things can drop off. But I think it's good to have an engineer on your project. Because they can oversee some of or they can give you advice on some of the issues that you might face, and they'll give you advice, even help you choose the contractor, because then they know what type of requirements they'll be looking for in a contractor, because they're in the field. So because you want an experienced contractor, it's just as important as all the other steps. So I think that's the one thing that's overlooked. People, and then also another mistake that people make is, although it ties into the fact that they undermine engineers, but I think also, so when you're choosing a contractor, you first start with you make sure that you have a team of consultants. So you have your electrical engineer, your architect, your mechanical engineer, your quantity surveyor. So all these people will be able to input into and contribute to the successful completion of that project. So obviously your first step would probably be you create your client's brief. And then after you've created that brief, which basically tells the group your vision, what you want, the type of feel of the house. So by that time, at least you should have information on your plots, your plot size, and maybe even a survey, which you can then give to your architect and your engineer to just give an initial input. So after they've done that initial input, then your architect will come up with your drawings, and then also come up with a site layout, which will tell us where the services are. Also, in the initial stage, you would also be looking for, are there any services on that plot? So then you can figure out.
So when you say services, you mean like water, electricity. So that you're not disturbing what's on the property, and then you know how to route everything from your house into what is already existing, if need be, or if you need to create something new. So so that will be done in the initial stages, which is the key information for later stage. And I think people don't also do and I think this is where, sorry, I'm an engineer, so I'm just going to be talking about engineers, but these are some of the things that the engineer will tell you, okay, they'll ask you, are there any services, or how is the land sloping? So they look at the drainage system. So to answer your question, I think people overlook having a complete team on a project. They want to just do everything by themselves. And then to continue where I left off, so you have your initial stage, right? And so the engineer will do the assessment together with the architect as well. And then you have your site plan. So now you know, okay, my site slopes like this. This is where the water goes. If I'm to create a drainage system, this is where I'll divert the water. So you check also for existing drainages. Are there existing drainages around? So that we know where the water is going to connect into.
Because a lot of, especially in rainy season, a lot of houses just end up flooding. Especially in rural areas, but usually people don't. Anyway, that's a bigger problem, I think. It's more of the drainage system here in Zambia than just the building aspect.
Yeah.
But I think so after you've done your assessment, then your architect does the site layout and they do some initial drawings for the structure.
Yes.
Depending on the size that you want, the spaces that you want. Then at that point, I think it's good to get the engineer's input.
Yes.
Because then they'll look at issues like the openings of your windows. So they tell you, okay, for this type of opening, you need this size of beams. If there's need of columns, they'll tell you where to place all those different columns. And also they can give more advice on, I think maybe if you want an opening like this, or things like for us here in Zambia, if you're using, or rather, let me compare it to other countries. Like there's a project where we had somebody wanted a door that was like 9 meters high.
Wow.
And we were just like, we don't get that type of doors here in Zambia.
Yeah.
So, and then also for things like glass, there's a limit in how big your glass panels can be, because then normally they would have to break it, and then also you look into like the thickness of the glass. So for certain openings, an engineer will give you advice on the current market. So they'll say, okay, for what you want, in order for it to work, then maybe you have to like outsource from another country, or you work within the limits that we have here. Yes.
So people who want like right now, a lot of people like very big openings. Then you have to be involved in that because of the spans that are involved. Okay.
Also because then if you have a window, you're going to build on top.
Yes.
And so you have to have a decent structure which will take the weight of the roof at that point. So the bigger the opening, the deeper the beam size and also the columns. So then it has to be looked at into a bit more detail in terms of the size of the beam and also the type of reinforcement that you use.
We had an interior designer, we interviewed an interior designer a few episodes ago, and she spoke about how one of the issues that she sees a lot when she's coming in is that there are issues in the foundation.
Okay.
The foundations, in issues with waterproofing. Where your walls are showing that there are problems. Perhaps you could speak more on that. Like, what's the importance of doing the foundation right? What are the common issues that come up?
So that, especially to do with the foundation, the initial step is your soil analysis. So your geotechnical analysis is very important in sizing the foundations. So it determines how big your foundations are going to be, and also the type of foundation that you're going to use for the structure. So the first stage, don't skip it. Do your soil investigations because it will help solve a lot of issues in the long run, like having cracks in buildings, and then that's where you start seeing water seeping through. And then also you have to take care of your waterproofing, so ensure that like even when you're putting your slab, you have that polythene sheeting which protects moisture from entering, and also making sure that your structure is above natural ground level. So above natural ground level. A safe height may be something like 300 millimeters or even more, but then obviously you'd have to step into your house. So, but as long as it's at least above ground, and then you're protecting the upper structure. And then for waterproofing, in some cases, I think you would have to get specialist advice depending on where you need to put it. For example, if it's a roof slab, then you'd look into somebody who's more specialized in that area. Decide on the type of waterproofing. Is it going to be a membrane, or is it going to be you add mixtures into the concrete to ensure that it's more watertight. But so for that, you have to really take care of, you have to really consider the waterproofing properly. If you need a specialist, you also invite one.
Yeah.
But then also some other issues are just to do with construction because like it just wasn't done properly. The mixing of the concrete was not done properly, or maybe the person who was doing the laying the blocks didn't mix their mortar properly, so things are just not sitting properly. Sometimes even poor construction methods or poor construction materials might contribute to that. So then it means that in the initial stages, when you're choosing who's going to build, you have to really consider that it's somebody who's experienced and somebody who's got the right equipment and materials that will, maintain the quality of your building.
So if there's a problem in a foundation, perhaps the waterproofing wasn't done properly. A lot of problems that we see are with damp on the walls. How does that get corrected? Like later on, there's been painting has been done, and maybe you even see visible cracks in your walls, and it's because of a foundation. How does that get corrected?
Okay, so there are different methods, I think, to deal with the issues to do with foundation. First, you have to understand what's the root cause of these problems. So if you're having cracks, why are we having cracks? So maybe it's due to settlement in the building. So things are just it's settling, which it's natural for it to happen. But if there's too much settlement, then you start seeing cracks at certain positions in your building. So there are different methods of how to deal with that. In some cases, there's something that's called crack stitching. So what it is, like, just think of a cloth, or just think of like you're knitting two pieces together. So usually with like a mesh or some type of reinforcement to like stick the two pieces together. But usually also some of these methods are a bit temporary, so you see that the cracks will come back. So but then another way to deal with the root cause now is, if it's severe, you would have to look into things like underpinning of the foundation. So adding, maybe the foundation that was constructed was like 800 millimeters wide, but you needed 1.2 meters.
Wow.
So then you would have to put in some foundations below the existing foundation to just add more, to make sure that it's more stable, because then you're now putting the foundation that was actually required. So it's a costly. Yes, it's a very costly way to deal with it. And then maybe also to deal with issues of drainage, then you look at how is the water draining around the structure. Which is a lot of these issues are best sorted out right from the beginning, because it's a bit more difficult if you have to deal with them after the structure has been standing. So even things like waterproofing the structure, it's best to deal with it just right when you're starting. Similar to things like termites in buildings, it's easier to deal with them when you're starting. But once it's up, you just keep dealing with the same thing. You have to just make it routine to always spray or whatever. But so even for drainage system, you put something like an apron around the house to ensure that all the water that comes goes away from your house and not towards. That's why even looking at the slope of your plot is important, because you might find you've built your house at the lowest point. So then everything is, all the water is going there. To you. And then, which in that case, then you need more like sophisticated drainage system to take it out, like away from your house. I hope I've answered your question.
I think you have very well. So we've looked at the foundation. What considerations are there, like with your slab, when you get to the ring beam? What is there in terms of the structure?
Okay, so this is not
like from your slab up to, say, your wall level. I'm trying to use terms that people are familiar with and what they'd have to consider at these points.
Okay, so normally for for a house, it's not something that's heavily loaded.
Yeah.
So like compared to, let's say, if it was a hotel or something, but usually these are things that are lightly loaded.
Yeah.
So for your slab, mainly what's going to be there is like furniture or your furniture, your beds, your TV, anyway, very little compared to a hotel.
Yeah.
So in terms of consideration for the slab, I think some of the things that you have to consider is obviously how thick your slab is going to be, the type of reinforcement, which usually is much less. Is not something too heavy for a house. But why you need to consider it is because you might have cracks on your slab. And then if they get severe, then you start getting moisture into the house. So you have to consider how thick it's going to be and the type of reinforcement. And then also in some cases, you put some construction joints, which will help with the cracks in the slab. So I think from the structural point of view, in terms of the slab, those are the main things to consider. Yeah. And then when it comes to the walls, it's for me, I'd look at how high your walls are. Because then I have to consider the stability of those walls. Yeah. And also, do you just have one long wall or is it turning at certain points? Because if you have turns in your walls, then it's a bit more stable rather than just having one long 6 meter high wall, which will probably fall. Yeah. And then also reinforcement in your walls, you need your brick force. And in some cases, you also solid fill the walls and even add reinforcement into the walls, especially depending on how high and how long it's going to be. Then you have to make sure that it's a bit more stable. Yeah. And then
a lot of the modern designs definitely need these considerations.
Yes.
Yeah. Where you have lots of open plan spaces.
Yes. Yeah. So then you might solid fill them and also just put some at least vertical reinforcement, but as well as the brick force. Yeah. But usually it's minimal unless your design is like, I don't know, something, unless your spans are like 10 meters by 10 meters, it's an open space, then also you have to consider adding columns within your walls to ensure more stability, and they are the ones which will carry the roof structure. Yeah. So, and then also your ring beams add more stability to your walls. And also, usually for ring beams, I like to put them at the window or door level so that it's something that goes round. So instead of having a lintel and a ring beam, you just have a ring beam at that level. But some people like to have their doors at different heights. Maybe one is at 2 meters, the next is at 3 meters. So maybe that's a challenge. Yeah. But usually you'd still have your lintel and then you build on top. Some people also skip the lintel stage.
Wow.
I've seen.
And what would happen if you skip that?
You will start seeing cracks. And then obviously if it's very bad, then it's going to fall.
Wow.
But usually it's a very good idea to have your lintel because that's now the structural element that's going to carry the structure above. Because you're going to build on top.
Yeah. And then your roof, finally, what sort of considerations are there? There's the obsession with flat roofs.
Yes.
A lot of people like that, the modern style, and they want to achieve that. What sort of things are you seeing that are not being done right with that type of roof? Yeah.
Okay, so I think for flat roofs, compared to the hipped roof, some people, I think a lot of people consider it because they think, I'm spending less on the roof structure itself. Like if you're using timber, then you're using much shorter pieces because it's just flat, as opposed to having a slope and very high trusses or high-pitched roofs. Yeah. But I think the biggest one is to do with the drainage of the roof. A lot of people complain about leakages because the water is not draining very well. Usually then the slope in the roof is very minimal or it's it's not, or it's just flat.
Yeah.
Or maybe 1 degree, which is something that you won't even notice, but at least it slopes, or at least it drains the water.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest challenge is drainage for flat roofs.
Yeah.
So then you have to think properly about how you're going to drain that roof, where you're going to position those downpipes.
Yeah.
Because you don't want water sitting up there. And also it adds extra weight to the roof, which you don't want because it might cause some extra problems.
Yeah.
But so the biggest thing to consider, I think, is where your drainage is going to be.
Yeah.
So where you're positioning your downpipes. Some people would have them within the house, which may be a problem.
Yeah.
But I think also for flat roofs, you have to maintain them a lot more often than high roofs.
Yeah.
Because leaves, plastics may just sit there and then they might block your gutter or your downpipe. So then you have to constantly be flushing things out and cleaning up.
Yeah.
So, but from a structural point of view, anything can be done. Maybe the only consideration is like you're using, like I said, maybe because you're using less, if it's steel or if it's timber, using a bit less than for the high pitched roofs.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the advantage, but really, it can still be achieved just as long as you've considered the drainage
and you've done that properly.
Yes.
Okay. So as we just finish up with the show, can you imagine that? And for anybody who's got questions that are related to structure, please do send them in, and we'll call Hannah to come back and help us to answer them. But what would your advice be to somebody who's just starting out on the journey? They want to know the process and they want to do it right.
Yes.
What would your advice be from your professional point of view?
Okay. I think I have to look into the camera.
No problem.
So if you're watching this, okay. I think the first thing that you really have to look into is your budget. Yeah. You have to really consider how much it's going to cost, because even all the things that I've mentioned, like your soil investigation, having an engineer on the project, those are things that are going to cost they'll add an extra cost to your overall cost of the building. So you really have to consider your budget and make sure that you've dealt with the financial aspect, which will ease a lot of issues that you might face throughout the project. And then so involve an engineer right from the start. Let them do an assessment on the plot, give them a rough idea of the type of house you want to do, and then let them have some input right at the beginning. And then also at least have a team of consultants, people that will give expert advice and input into the different areas for your project. So your electrical, your mechanical, at least get somebody that's experienced and that has that type of expertise to input even from the beginning, but throughout the process. And then also involve those consultants in the choosing of the contractor, because they can advise on the type of requirements that they need, the certifications, and also they'll be able to assess the work that the contractor has done before and then advise if it's something that would be suitable for the type of project you have. And then, I don't know. I think those would be the main things. But so budget properly, because then you can freely do the rest properly.
Hannah, thank you so much for agreeing to come onto the show, and thank you for all the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared. We're so glad that you've been on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And we shall see you soon. An Architect and a DJ Build a Home podcast has been brought to you by Emote Projects Limited. The show is hosted by Kalenga, he's the DJ, and me, Mphangela, I'm the architect. Media by Monkey Business Agency.
Music by Bless the Creative.